Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Vonich of Statewide News Service, jbiztakevalley.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
I'm having a lot of fun doing all of that, and I talk about in my column how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. And but unfortunately, alcohol and drugs relate to the Jewish community also. And the show today is really compelling. And we have Robert Lindsey, the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Friends of Recovery New York. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you very much.
And next to him is Eric Dyer, who's an Albany resident in long-term recovery, who happens to be Jewish as well.
So, thank you for having me.
Well, the first thing is Mark mentioned it, but usually when people say alcoholism and drug abuse, that's not a Jewish issue. That's it's for the goyim, you would say, for the nations. It's not, Jews don't get drunk.
Right.
And unfortunately, I'm a rabbi, but I consider myself an honorary social worker because people come to me for all kinds of help.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's not true. That the Jewish people, or I don't know about the percentages, I just know from a gut reaction that people come and there are problems. I don't know if it's less than everybody else.
Well, Bob and I have known each other for 30 years, and he was with the Oasis.
I was with the New York State Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence.
Right, and that's where we first met.
Yes.
So when I've been interviewing him and talking to him for all this time, and he worked at Betty Ford Center in California.
Yep.
And then after that, you went to...
Well, I was vice president of a employee assistance program company, but also spent 8 years as the president and CEO of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, known as NCADD.
So there's a, you're like Mr. Alcohol and drug abuse guy. You're the go-to guy that I would think of every time there'd be a situation like this. So,
well, I certainly appreciate that compliment. But to really respond to your question, is that one of the things we know about alcoholism and addiction is that it's a chronic disease, like heart, diabetes, and cancer. Chronic, progressive, fatal if untreated, and genetically predisposed. So one of the things that we've learned along the way is that, like other chronic diseases, everybody's eligible. That plain and simple, some people's bodies metabolize and respond to the effects of alcohol and drugs differently than others, so that no one is exempt from being potentially someone who can develop alcoholism or addiction.
We're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
And when I was in 5th grade, I wrote a book report that said alcoholism, a drug or an addiction or something, and I talked about how it was both, and I got an A on the book report, I think. But even back when I was 10 years old, I was still writing about alcoholism, drug addiction, and it doesn't seem like there's any way that we could ever get a handle on this, because I remember, if you look at the old TV shows that are based on real life experiences like Dragnet, you'll see heroin and the drugs of choice today were back in the 70s.
Without
they're
question.
Just cheaper now, and they're more accessible now.
Well, the good news, Mark, though, is that our conversation today can be very different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, literally. Because now we talk about 23 million people in this country over the age of 12 that are addicted to alcohol or other drugs. The great majority being alcohol. But the other thing that we can talk about that we could never talk about before is that we now estimate almost 23 million people as well are living life in recovery from alcoholism and addiction.
You talk about 10% of the United States?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Absolutely.
Have you personally ever been addicted? Or?
I personally have not been addicted, but I come from a family where I have 11 family members living life in recovery today. So I've had the opportunity to see firsthand both the impact and effect of active alcoholism and addiction, but more importantly, the celebration of recovery. And that's the piece that the public literally is desperate to hear about, because we inundate them with the problem. We talk about all the numbers, we talk about all the people. It's all the news report is all about the drama and chaos of active alcoholism and addiction.
So what is the recovery? What would happen if someone came either to you or to a professional and hey, I got a problem, which is, I guess, half the solution always. They say, at least you know there's a problem there.
Without question. I mean, the first process really is about the recognition that I'm in trouble. The reality is that some people are able to come to that point themselves, others are not. And in those cases, family intervenes, or the court intervenes, or an employer intervenes. And the first step is to make sure that we get that person to somebody who's both specifically trained and successfully experienced in treating recovery or treating addiction and helping people into recovery.
So is
Let me go back. And unfortunately, like most other chronic disease, we usually say just talk to your physician. But in this case, we can't do that. You know, we can't say talk to your physician, talk to your psychologist, your social worker, or even your clergy person, because most of them really have received little or no training,
Right.
and more importantly, have not been successful in introducing people to recovery. So most important step is to get to somebody, again, specifically trained, successfully experienced in helping individuals and families.
Is that through, well, I have someone in a congregant, and he is a doctor, but he has been trained in that. And just, again, the, like Mark's saying, different drugs, but it's really heroin. It just goes through cycles. And he gives them a different kind of drug to wean them off of the heroin. Is that part of the recovery? I'm sure it is.
Well, it can be. So, but first of all, I want to just remind people that what we talk about is addiction. All of the press right now is really focused around heroin in particular.
Right.
But if you look at just the number of people that died due to addiction, it's about 132,000 people a year. About 88,000 is alcohol. About 44,000 is all other drugs combined. So to your question, though, in terms of the way that we treat addiction, for some people, the use of other types of medication can be very instrumental in helping people establish and or maintain their recovery over time. The great majority of people in recovery today have done it through an abstinence-based recovery, but there's lots of other people that have found other ways in terms of establishing and maintaining their recovery as well.
How? In which ways?
Well, I mean, you certainly, all of us are familiar with programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. You know, those 12-step programs have been very effective. Other programs like Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery. There's a number of other mechanisms that are out there for people that have been very helpful in their recovery. So faith, for many people, is an integral part of their recovery. Along with the other care and support that they receive in the community.
So talk a little bit about incarceration versus treatment. And I want to bring Eric in
Absolutely.
after you answer this, but I just didn't want him to be sitting there.
Oh, absolutely. Eric's got a lot to say about all of this as well.
Talk about incarceration versus treatment.
Well, I think that the reality is that if you look at the way that as a culture that we respond to alcoholism and addiction, we traditionally have responded to the symptoms. Behaviorally, we've dealt with the criminal justice side of this issue. On the health side, we've dealt with the gastritis, pancreatitis, broken arms, legs, cirrhosis, fatty livers. On the emotional side, we deal with the stress, anxiety, depression, the marital family relationship issues. But in all of those cases, those are in most cases the result of someone's addiction. And treating those issues, independent of addressing the addiction as a primary illness, we will not be effective. All we'll see is temporary improvement that on the physical side, maybe we've made the person physically healthy enough to be able to continue to drink and use. On the behavioral side, it's given us a sense that we've punished them and now we're safe. And on the emotional side, we see temporary improvement, but over time it's not successful. So from our perspective, when you look at the options of incarceration versus treatment, it is clear that treatment is the best strategy. At the same time, the reality is that some people, because of the nature of the crime, should in fact be held accountable for what they've done. But while they're incarcerated, we should be engaging that person in treatment. It is the only way that they will not become reincarcerated, is by treatment and recovery supports in the community when they leave.
So can people go through treatment programs without being incarcerated? Like, could there be a leniency to try treatment instead of incarceration?
Without question, there are a number of alternatives that have been created. Probably one of the best known is drug treatment court. Drug court has been extremely effective in, number one, holding somebody accountable while at the same time engaging them and supporting them while they're in treatment. And if in fact they're unsuccessful in treatment, you have the legal mechanism to incarcerate.
Because
But-
jail doesn't solve the issue. That just gives them,
Well,
so it's
Mark.
3 hots and a cot.
Right, it's the equivalent of bringing somebody into the emergency room, doing an x-ray and saying your leg's broken, and 3 months later they come back and their leg's still broken. We've done nothing to intervene. The assumption always was is that we could punish our way out of the problem. The person would come to the realization that they can't use alcohol and other drugs
I
safely.
go to the prisons
Ineffective.
also, there are social programs. I think
Correct.
they're inadequate.
Yes.
But, just for the record, there are social,
There's no question that over the years, we've established some good programs in jails. But the other side of that is regrettably, and this is a story from my own personal experience, I have a good friend whose son was a good student, good athlete, got injured, got put on prescription drugs, became addicted, and as a result of that addiction, committed a series of crimes that resulted in his incarceration. While he was in jail, he was given good program and treatment, but when he was set to leave, they did absolutely nothing to connect him to immediate recovery supports in the community. And that's the only way that most people are going to be able to effectively maintain their recovery. So at Friends of Recovery New York, the one thing we talk a lot about is the need for recovery support services in the community. Recovery community centers, youth clubhouses, family support navigators to help the families, and recovery coaches to provide that kind of support in the community. And when we do that, we're not only more effective with individuals in terms of maintaining and supporting their recovery, ultimately we save an enormous amount of dollars and resources when we treat it right.
Do you work with other treatment centers, like the ones in Schenectady or the ones in the regionally? Or?
Well, Friends of Recovery New York is a statewide organization, so we work with all the organizations that are out there. Our particular interest right now is the recognition that we've invested a lot of dollars and resources in prevention, in treatment. The piece that's most underdeveloped is that recovery support services in the local community. And the reality is that I said that we've invested a lot of money. The reality is that we've invested nowhere near
Drop in
what's
the bucket.
needed and necessary. It is an absolute drop in the bucket.
Okay. So I want to bring in Eric.
Yep. Terrific.
He has a
Hello,
compelling,
Eric.
he has a compelling story. I mean, you don't look worn and tattered and whatever, but you've been through a lot. So again, you're 26 years old. You went to Union College. When did your interest in drugs and alcohol start?
I mean, I had started, I guess you would call it experimenting, right, with drugs and alcohol at a very young age, around the age of 12. And it progressed
You
fairly,
were getting ready for your bar mitzvah.
right, exactly, as I was studying, actually,
Okay.
right? And as my disease progressed, it went from things like trying a little bit of alcohol and trying some marijuana to harder drugs. But I was very fortunate to be brought up in a family where you hear a lot of the times people say addiction is a family disease. It's a family illness. It's genetic. I was fortunate enough to be brought up in a family of recovery because I had a father who was in long-term recovery.
Really?
I had a grandfather who died in recovery, and I had uncles and aunts in recovery. So that made a huge difference for me.
Do you
So,
think it's hereditary?
I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I
No,
can't
but
speak
have
to
you
that.
asked
But
have you asked that question? Have you
We're-
gotten an answer?
But I would answer your question this way. My grandfather
Yeah,
had it. My dad has it.
right.
I have it.
Ants
And multiple siblings of
Have
mine
it.
have it. Not all of them, but more than one of us. So I think this says a lot about whether or not it is.
So how
genetic.
many children in your family?
Well, I don't think we have enough time for this session to
No.
explain that. But
No, okay.
there,
yeah.
there's altogether about 7 of us if you include step siblings and half
Right.
siblings and
Okay. Multiple marriages.
exactly, yeah,
okay.
modern family.
Okay, so you have how many siblings? 7?
So yes,
Okay.
including myself.
And then how many of those 7 are?
Confidently speaking, 3 of us,
3 of them.
including myself.
Okay.
Yes,
and then the other 4 you don't know, but they could be.
yes, you could say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you were 12, you were experimenting, you went 13, it was half of a lifetime ago.
Right.
You know, you went through your bar mitzvah, there's obviously a lot of drinking at bar
Right.
mitzvahs.
Yes.
The bar of the mitzvah.
Bar,
Right, yeah,
the bar
right.
mitzvah, right.
Yeah.
And then, you know, did that sort of accelerate things? I mean, you were in junior high, I guess, or middle
Correct,
school at the
correct.
time?
Well, I mean, a lot of it was, it wasn't like my friends were also engaged. There wasn't peer pressure. It wasn't like my friends were also really engaged in it. What had happened to me was, I explain it like this. I had liked sports. I had liked hanging out with friends. I had liked all those things. I had experimented with marijuana, and it was like flipping a light switch. Like everything changed for me. It was like that was the feeling that I was looking for my entire life. I look at it as like I had this void, and I was trying to fill a void, and like that was what filled the void for me.
And why did it make you feel?
Well, it made me feel like I could fit in, even though I already had friends and I played sports and I did all the normal things that someone in middle school would be doing in a great community, by the way, with a great family.
In Massachusetts?
Correct. I still, it allowed me to feel like I could be comfortable socializing with people and that I could do all the things I wanted to do without fear. I wasn't scared to fail or scared to succeed. I could just
Right.
do what I wanted to do. And I think you had asked a really good question before about the incarceration issue. So I as someone who's experienced this, look at this as really a healthcare issue. Because for me, as that roughly 10% of the population, what happens is I have an allergy to drugs and alcohol. And what that means is, all that really means is that I have an abnormal reaction when I put drugs or alcohol into my body. So a normal person can have it, take their beer, put it down, be done for the night. When I have a beer, for example, I cannot stop thinking about it. I will crave it, and I will do all of these things that my good Jewish mother did not bring me up to do, because I will do anything to get to that craving. So for me, as that 10% of the population who has this chronic illness and this allergy to drugs and alcohol, the solution that I've found has been largely based, I would say, in community support and in faith. I attribute a large part of my life today to the fact that I have a program of recovery that incorporates faith and having a belief on a daily basis.
So you didn't give up on Judaism and say, oh, look, this is what got me into this, and I'm going to go a different direction, maybe find a different faith or something.
No, I was very fortunate. I went to Solomon Schechter Day School till about 5th grade.
In Massachusetts.
Correct, in Massachusetts. And what I love about Judaism is that you're always taught about this loving God. And that to me was so helpful through the pain and suffering that I went through, because I always knew that there was this power greater than myself, that it's like this is this loving God that wants me to do right. And some of my peers in recovery don't necessarily always feel that way based on the way they were brought up in terms of their relationship with God. But I had always had a loving, kind relationship with God, so it made all the difference.
Mark, I just wanted to say, because we are in the Jewish view,
Sure.
but I mean, what's helping Eric is really the Lubavitcher Rebbe said would help all society. Just a little bit of tangent, just a commercial from the Rebbe, from my sponsor. But I mean, he did say, because, listen, there's other issues. Obviously, we get onto the program and we have all kinds of politicians, and they'll say, what's the biggest issue? The DA, for example.
Sure.
Heroin.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the number one issue.
Absolutely.
And in society today, in a lot of places, and crime is obviously another big one. And the Rebbe always felt that if people would have a feeling of a higher authority,
Yes.
we're just saying faith, a belief in a higher authority, that would cure a lot of the societal ills. So it's a known thing. AA, I know, works with
Absolutely.
that a lot, but just a living proof that, there's somebody or something, I mean, God, that it's higher than yourself.
Without question.
So when did you move from alcohol to drugs, and what was that transition like?
I mean,
Not that alcohol's not a drug, but you know what I'm
right.
saying.
Well, I mean, the majority of my experience initially was with marijuana.
Okay.
And I never drank a lot because I grew up, once again, in a family of recovery where my dad identified as an alcoholic. So I said, if my dad's an alcoholic, I definitely can't drink, but I can maybe smoke some marijuana, because that wasn't his problem. And I came to later find out that his problem was not just alcohol, it was a whole host of other drugs. And so I would say probably around the age of 17, 18 is when it really started to progress.
And where were you in your life at the time and educationally? Were you at Union yet? Or?
I was at Union College. I wouldn't attribute it though.
No, I was just asking what that, connect. I wasn't making a connection because I always think of Albany as the party school,
Right.
And then you went to Union, and I don't think of that as much of a
Right.
party school,
Yeah.
but maybe you made it a party
Yeah,
school.
right.
It's like,
Yeah, I would say probably around 17, 18, but a lot of it had to do with the mix between being in college and going back home as well, because I mean, the reality is, it's I went to school with all of these people who, as you guys know, on a college campus, people party, they drink, they do drugs. However, since they didn't have the chronic illness of addiction that I have, drugs and alcohol didn't affect them the same way. So I can recall when I was probably about 20 years old, picking up the phone and calling my dad, who once again is in long-term recovery, and saying like, I need help.
oh, really?
And that made all the difference in the world, because once again, I had a dad who lived this life of I'm proud to be in recovery. So he removed that stigma and that negative energy that sometimes people put around recovery, and he made it into this positive thing because of all the things he was able to accomplish. So I was able to pick up the phone and call my dad and say, I need help. And he was able to connect me with other people who could help me. And that's really what made all the difference in the world.
Did you
know,
get help locally here?
I eventually got a little help here through the college, but then eventually I went back to Boston.
That's interesting that you say that, and I think that's a big lesson for a lot of people and our viewers. Like you're in law school. I don't know if we mentioned that your union
Not yet.
prestigious.
Jumping ahead.
Well, I'm just saying you're making it in the world. And you like kind of Mark says, you don't look like some drug addict off the homeless
Sure.
off the street, to say the least. And, here you go on TV and, you think, hey, I had a problem. I mean, a lot of people would just hide it,
Sure.
Okay, no, you don't. I mean, I met you before. We worked out at the JCC. I don't assume a person's a former drug. Yeah, a nice Jewish boy that's going to
That's right.
law school. That's all I knew from, and maybe, obviously you could have hid it. I'm not an FBI agent
Right.
to ask you what you did in your past life. But is that part of the recovery? Do they teach you that a little bit? Just be honest, and what you are. And second question also, you say recovery. What is constantly? Now you're clean, but what means for a person to be constantly in recovery?
Right.
Great
Well, recovery, for at least for me today, it's a way of living. It's a way of life. So I don't no mind-altering substances. That means no alcohol, drugs, or any other type of mind-altering substances. I don't put any of those into my system.
No coffee?
No, I mean you can't say no to coffee.
That's it.
Yeah.
Caffeine's a drug.
So yeah, can't say no to coffee. But what recovery really means to me today is that I can live my life free. I don't wake up having to clench my knuckles saying, oh, I don't want to use drugs today. I don't want to use drugs today. And I don't have to walk into a restaurant and say, oh my God, there's a bar there. I don't want to drink. Those things don't cross my mind today. On a daily basis, my mind is usually focused on the solution, which for me, the recovery solution happens to be a lot of times helping other people, whether or not they're in or out of recovery, and just essentially trying to get outside of myself in any way that I can. Because a lot of what I've found with the disease of addiction is a lot of it has to do with me being very selfish and me being very self-centered. And when I do little things like reach my hand out to other people and go out of my way to help someone, I stop thinking about myself, so I stop thinking about my addiction, and I tend not to put mind-altering substances into my body.
It's interesting because I have a person who won't come to my synagogue because he's a good friend, but he won't come because, of course, by Jews we make kiddush on wine.
Sure.
He can take a little l'chaim, we're not really drunks, but, just one little shot.
Yeah.
He says, no, there's the alcohol there. I will not come to your synagogue. I like your rabbi, but, and here you don't mind going into a bar and saying, hey, there's the alcohol, and doesn't.
Right, just don't offer him a drink, that's all.
Right. Yeah. And even if you did offer me a drink, it's like I've been given these tools through my recovery process where it's not something that emotionally impacts me. I'm not sitting there thinking oh my God,
No, you
they
have a
offered me
strong
drink.
will, you do. And you're young, maybe that's something else that attributed to, because, someone who's in their late 40s and gets into this situation might not be as able to handle it as well as you have. But, what I wanted to ask you was, what did you do when you said to your father, I need help? Did he say, well, come home? Did you drop out of Union? Were you already out of Union? Where was this?
Well, I was still at Union at the time, And his response was essentially, I know. Because he had no, I mean, he essentially knew the entire time, but he knew from his own experience that it was one of those situations where I really had to come to him to ask for help. Because a large part of this is, like you had said previously, like acknowledging the fact that I had a problem. And so for me, I had to voice that to him. And then as soon as that happened, he was able to start putting me in touch with other people who were in recovery.
Okay, so what were your majors in major and minor in union?
Maybe history and religious studies.
Okay, so it had nothing to do with chemistry or anything
No,
like that?
no, that's my brother.
That's your brother?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So did you finish union?
Yeah, so I graduated Union in 2013,
Uh-huh.
and now I'm finishing Albany Law School and Union Graduate College. Well, formerly Union Graduate College, now it's Clarkson University,
Right.
getting a law degree and an MBA.
Oh, wow. So you travel from Albany out to Schenectady every day? Or?
Not so much anymore because some of the classes are in the Schenectady campus,
Yeah.
but a lot of them now they do online. So I can,
Online?
Yes.
And you're interning at a law office? Or doing
Correct,
something?
correct.
Which law office?
And that's called Barclay and Damon.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That used to be Hiscock and Barker?
Correct, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to mention quickly,
Go
and you
ahead.
touched on it a little bit, was that much of our work is really about breaking the stigma that is attached to addiction and recovery. Because that stigma prevents millions of individuals and families from seeking help.
Yeah.
But in addition, it also results from a policy perspective in discrimination that creates barriers to recovery.
Right.
So much of our work is about breaking those things down. And clearly, the best way to be able to do that is when people like Eric are so matter of fact, both about their addiction, but more importantly about their recovery, to offer the hope that individuals and families watching this show and listening to it that are so desperate to hear that the reality of recovery is out there for anybody who can find their way to get the right kind of help, support services in the community.
That's interesting. Of all the schools that you applied to, which other ones, the law schools or whatever, which ones did you get into?
I got into New England Law School, and I will say this about New England Law School, which I appreciate. I wrote my essay on recovery because that's, I mean, the trauma of addiction. I mean, it took emotionally, it took a lot out of me, and it brought me to places I never thought I would be as a good Jewish boy who went to Solomon Schechter. And so I wrote about that in my essay. And at New England Law School, they wrote back to me. The dean wrote a little note on it, like, congratulations on your recovery, you're doing so well. And that to me was like a huge.
Was it part of an acceptance letter?
Yes,
Oh,
it
okay.
was.
But we're not going
Right,
to.
right. And that to me went such a long way because
Yeah.
it shows when the community accepts it and
Right.
doesn't put that stigma around it,
No, but
it
it's
makes
nice
all the
that he
difference in
gave
the
you
world.
Kanohara, he
Yeah.
gave you that other push,
Right.
So, that was very nice, it's very touching.
Yeah.
So, Mark, I wanted to ask you a question. It's interesting. We have so many, like I say, politicians and everything, DA in the whole area, and sheriffs, literally. And, again, they say the drugs. And I personally, because, again, I have 10 hats. Like I said, I think,
Sure.
special social worker.
Yeah.
And, I don't go into prisons and, you see what, like you saying, what it can lead to. I can't stand this legalized marijuana. But then people throw it back in my face. Because a lot of, even their regular, Jewish people, you think traditional, how much money we're going to make society and
Sure.
I don't know, whatever. And they say, but like your fact was alcoholism is even worse than,
without question.
So they said, well, why don't you petition to go against the alcohol, which I wouldn't.
Yep.
Got to make kiddish over here. But,
I mean, the reality is that those kinds of efforts have been made over the years. But I think more importantly right now, what we really need to be doing is listening to the voices of people in recovery, families in recovery, who are willing to share those experiences with the public, with policymakers and others to say that as you develop programs and services, as you develop policy, base those on our experiences as people in recovery. That way, we're going to be much more effective in providing the real help and support that individuals and families are so desperate to get.
And you should ask Eric about legalizing marijuana. He's the one who that's the gateway drug for you.
Well, I would say this, as if you are part of the 10% of the population who has the chronic illness, of addiction, it would be very hard for someone like myself, for example, to be ingesting marijuana and just go about my life. It's not, once again, it's not possible because of that allergy I talked about for someone like me. So at the end of the day, it's the 10% of people who have this illness are going to have this illness. So whether marijuana is legal or not, it's not going to make a difference to the people with this disease.
The other one, just very quick, is that the marijuana that's being sold today is a completely different product than what's been available historically. And as a result,
more
I
the
wonder
rate of
why-
addiction
I've
we're
heard
going to
that.
see is
Why
much
is
higher.
that? Why is
Because
that?
the level of delta
Yeah, Eric,
9
why is that?
tetrahydrocannabinol, the high producing element in marijuana, is much higher than it's ever been. And as a result, it is much more
They
addictive.
do it because it's sadistic, because they want people to get
Without,
hooked.
without question. The
That's what
reality
they
is,
want you to-
if, from a business standpoint, real simple, if you can sell a product that people become addicted to, you've got customers for life until they either stop drinking or using, incarcerated, or that they end up dead from their addiction.
You know-
So the reality is, selling addiction is a very powerful business model.
I just want to bring up two small points. Eric, your whole life would have been different if you
Wow,
had committed a
great point.
crime, while if you didn't go for treatment and you had broken into a liquor store or broken into someone's house to get money and jewelry to buy more drugs, I mean, you wouldn't be in law school.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, your whole life. So you got off this slippery slope early,
Right.
and that's a great testament
Yeah.
to you.
And just to add to that, I really like making this point. Because I had a family that was so open about recovery, the consequences my dad faced to get into recovery were far greater than the consequences that I faced. And then when I went to get in recovery, I had some consequences, but nothing major, nothing close to my dad. And then when my younger brother went to get into recovery, he had less consequences than I did.
Fewer consequences.
Fewer consequences. And I attribute that to the fact that when people are open about it and they remove that stigma and they want to talk about the solution rather than the problem, that can happen and the consequences can be avoided.
You know, so you never dealt with the incarceration part, which is great. And Bob, I just want you to know, what you do isn't done for free. So you have fundraisers, you
Without
have
question.
other ways of money coming into your organization. You do have a Recovery Fine Arts Festival. I don't know if...
Any government money?
We do have a grant from the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, but certainly, Mark, your point about the community becoming invested in the solution. Right now, we're grossly overinvested in the problem. It's time to invest in the solution, and recovery is the solution. So donations and contributions is a very, very important part of the work that we do.
What's your budget, or what do you need?
Budget right now is about $600,000 a year, but it doesn't even begin
No, it
to address the
doesn't. You
demand.
alone are worth $600,000 a year.
That's
So,
awful nice to hear.
You
but-
alone, but, you know...
It's going to be your board of
Yeah,
directors.
right.
You're totally
The board of-
underpaid, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, but the reality is that the real issue here is the return
Yeah.
on investment in terms of dollars.
Very
When you look
high.
at somebody like Eric,
Yeah.
so we're able to intervene when somebody still has their health, still has their family, still has their job, still has their freedom.
Right.
Our capacity to recover is much better. So the earlier we intervene, the better.
Well, that's why I asked about the government, because I know, how much does it cost to incarcerate?
$60,000
Well,
a
I was
year.
going to say that, yeah, 60,000.
Yeah.
So if you could just, a handful of people, how much, I mean, it goes on like, say, a ripple effect. These
Absolutely.
people are working, they're paying taxes,
You
they're
bet.
not incarcerated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
You bet.
and they're good citizens. And, I mean, that's why I say the government, instead of putting, billions of dollars into prisons, should.
Absolutely.
better
So one of the
to-
things we
to your
say to
program.
policymakers and to the public all the time, it's time to stop investing in the problem and start investing in the solution, and the
Excellent.
solution's recovery.
Excellent. We're out of time. We're going to
Thank
have
you
to
very
ask you
much,
back because it really is so interesting.
Glad to.
And I think it's really, like it is, as everybody says, it's the number one issue in society today, I think. And you're doing great work, both you and Erica, just, it's great. And you say in Hebrew, Yashakeh, good job for what you're doing, what you will be doing, and great success with good
And
health.
on top of that,
Thank you.
Eric is engaged, so you're
Mazel
starting a
tov,
mazel
mazel
tov,
tov.
and you're starting a new chapter in your
Yes.
life. Put everything behind you, move forward.
Yes.
Mazel
Thank
tov.
you.
Only
Thank
the
you.
best
Thank
of
you.
success.
Thank you.